My mother-in-law told everyone I faked my pregnancy for attention and pushed me into a swimming pool to prove a T. When I fainted and landed in the hospital, she mocked me again. But when the doctor came in with the report, her son looked at her in disgust and said 4 words that shut her up forever. My name is Ethan, and I'm 32 years old. I remember the day my life took a nosedive into what felt like a poorly written soap opera. It all started innocently enough, or at least, that's what I thought. My wife, Olivia, who is the absolute light of my life at 30 years old, and I were over the moon. We had been trying for a baby for a while, and finally, after months of hope and disappointment, we got the news we'd been longing for. Olivia was pregnant. We were ecstatic. We told our immediate families, and the initial reactions were filled with joy and congratulations. My parents were thrilled. They'd been eager for grandkids. Olivia's father was also incredibly happy for us, but Olivia's mother, Deborah, that's where the sunshine started to dim. Deborah, a woman in her late 50s with a permanent air of disapproval, had always been complicated. She and I had never truly clicked. I always felt like I was being silently judged for not being good enough for her precious Olivia. At first, Deborah's reaction to the pregnancy seemed normal, a polite hug and a mumbled congratulations. But as the weeks went by, a subtle shift occurred. She started making little comments, barely audible whispers that seemed designed to plant seeds of doubt. "Are you sure it's real, dear?" She'd ask Olivia, her eyes flicking towards me with an unreadable expression. Or to me, she'd say things like, "Olivia always did have a vivid imagination." I tried to brush it off as her being. "Well, Deborah." But the comments escalated. They became more frequent, more pointed, and louder. During a family dinner, about a month into Olivia's pregnancy, Deborah dropped a bomb. We were all chatting about baby names when she suddenly announced, her voice cutting through the cheerful atmosphere, "Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if this whole pregnancy is just for attention." The room went silent. Olivia's face crumpled, tears welling up in her eyes. My blood ran cold. "Mom, what are you talking about?" Olivia managed to whisper, her voice trembling. Deborah, however, seemed unfazed by the shock she had created. She leaned back in her chair, a smug look on her face. "Oh, you know how Ethan loves to be the center of everything," she said, gesturing towards me as if I were some kind of performing seal. "And Olivia, bless her heart, is so easily influenced." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Deborah," I started, my voice tight with anger. "That's a horrible thing to say. Olivia is pregnant, and we are both incredibly happy." "Happy for the attention, maybe," she retorted, her eyes narrowed. "It's all a bit convenient, isn't it? Suddenly, everyone is fawning over you too." The argument escalated quickly. Olivia was in tears, her father was trying to mediate, and I was struggling to contain my fury. Deborah, however, remained stubbornly convinced of her outrageous theory. She had somehow twisted our joy into a cynical ploy for attention. The following weeks were a living hell. Deborah didn't stop. She started telling other family members, her friends, even some of our neighbors, that Olivia was faking the pregnancy. She'd corner people at social gatherings, whispering her accusations with a conspiratorial air. The whispers started to get back to us. People looked at Olivia with a mixture of pity and suspicion. The joy of our impending parenthood was being poisoned by Deborah's malicious lies. Olivia was devastated. The stress was taking a toll on her, both emotionally and physically. I did my best to support her, to reassure her that Deborah's words were meaningless, but it was hard. The constant negativity was a dark cloud hanging over our lives. Then came the day of Olivia's cousin's pool party. We almost didn't go, but Olivia insisted. She didn't want to hide away because of her mother. We arrived, trying to put on a brave face, but the atmosphere felt strained. I could see people looking at Olivia, and I knew Deborah had been working her poison. Deborah approached us by the pool, a sickly, sweet smile on her face. "Olivia, dear, you look..." "Well," she said, her eyes scanning Olivia's still relatively flat stomach. "Are you feeling all right?" "Yes, Mom, I'm fine," Olivia replied, her voice flat. "You know," Deborah continued, her voice loud enough for a few people nearby to hear, "some people will go to any lengths for attention, even pretending to be pregnant." She looked directly at Olivia, her eyes cold and challenging. I stepped forward, placing a protective arm around Olivia. "Deborah, please stop. You're being cruel." "Cruel?" she scoffed. "Or am I just seeing the truth? Maybe a little. Demonstration is in order." Before either of us could react, she lunged forward and shoved Olivia. Olivia gasped, losing her balance, and tumbled into the swimming pool. The water splashed around her as she went under. I reacted instantly, jumping in after her. Olivia resurfaced, sputtering and coughing, her eyes wide with shock and fear. But then something else happened. As I helped Olivia to the side of the pool, she suddenly went limp in my arms. Her eyes rolled back and she lost consciousness. Panic surged through me. Olivia! Olivia! I yelled, but she didn't respond. People rushed over, their earlier whispers forgotten in the face of this sudden crisis. Someone called 911. Within minutes, paramedics arrived and took an unconscious Olivia to the nearest hospital. I rode in the ambulance with her, my heart pounding in my chest. The guilt and anger I felt towards Deborah were overwhelming. How could she do this? How could she be so cruel and reckless? At the hospital, Olivia was rushed into the emergency. I waited anxiously in the sterile waiting area, pacing back and forth, my mind racing. Eventually, a doctor came out and told me that Olivia had fainted, likely due to stress and the shock of the fall. They were running some tests to be sure. A little while later, Deborah arrived, accompanied by Olivia's father. Deborah's face was a mask of false concern. "Oh, Ethan, I'm so worried about Olivia," she said, her voice dripping with insincerity. I glared at her. "You did this, Deborah. You pushed her." "Now, Ethan, don't be ridiculous," she said, her tone sharp. "She probably just tripped." The pool deck was slippery. "Tripped?" I repeated incredulously. "You deliberately pushed your pregnant daughter into a pool because you thought she was faking it." "Pregnant?" Deborah scoffed. "We'll see about that, won't we?" She actually had the audacity to smirk. Maybe this little dip will have washed away her delusion. Just then, the doctor walked back into the waiting area, holding a file in his hand. "Mr. Miller?" he called out. I rushed over to him. "Yes, that's me." "How is my wife?" I asked, my voice filled with anxiety. "Mrs. Miller is stable now," the doctor said. "We ran some tests as a precaution. And, well, there's something you should both know." He looked at Deborah, then back at me. "The blood tests confirm that Mrs. Miller is indeed pregnant. In fact," he paused, looking down at the report, a slight frown on his face. "It appears to be a bit further along than initially thought. Closer to 3 months. Deborah's smug expression faltered for a split second, but then she quickly recovered. "Well, those tests can be wrong," she said dismissively. "She could still be faking the symptom." The doctor looked at her, a hint of disbelief in his eyes. "Mrs. Deborah," she supplied. "Mrs. Deborah, the tests are quite conclusive. Furthermore," the doctor continued, looking back at the report, "the fall and the shock triggered something. We did an ultrasound to check on the baby, and—" He looked up, his expression serious. "There are complications. The fall has put significant stress on the pregnancy. Mrs. Miller will need to be monitored very closely. In fact, she'll need to be on bed rest for the foreseeable future to minimize the risk of—" He trailed off, his gaze fixed on the report. The weight of his words hung in the air. Olivia's father looked pale and worried. I felt a surge of protective anger towards Deborah. How could she have been so reckless? Then Olivia's son, my stepson from her previous marriage, Liam, arrived. He was 10 years old, a bright and perceptive kid. He had been staying with his father for the weekend and rushed to the hospital as soon as he heard what happened. He ran straight to me, his eyes wide with concern. "Dad? Is Mom okay?" he asked, his voice trembling. He had started calling me Dad a few months ago, a gesture that meant the world to me. "She's going to be okay, buddy," I said, putting my arm around him. "But she needs to rest." Liam then turned his gaze towards his grandmother, Deborah, who was still standing there with a defiant look on her face. He had overheard parts of the conversation in the waiting room. His young face, usually so full of life, was now etched with anger and disappointment. He looked directly at Deborah, his small frame radiating a surprising amount of fury, and said 4 words, his voice clear and firm. "You tried to hurt them." The silence that followed was deafening. Deborah's face drained of all color. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Olivia's father stepped away from her, his expression a mixture of shock and disgust. The doctor looked from Liam to Deborah, a knowing look in his eyes. Liam's simple, honest accusation hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. There was no way for Deborah to twist it, no way to lie her way out of it. A 10-year-old boy had seen through her malice and spoken the truth plain and simple. The doctor cleared his throat. "Mr. Miller, if you'll follow me, I'll take you to see your wife." I nodded, putting a hand on Liam's shoulder. We walked away, leaving Deborah standing there, alone and speechless, the weight of her actions finally crashing down on her. Her son, Olivia's father, didn't even look at her as he followed us. In that moment, I knew things would never be the same. Liam's 4 words had cut through Deborah's web of lies and manipulation more effectively than any argument I could have made. They were the innocent truth, spoken with the unwavering conviction of a child who loved his mother and his soon-to-be sibling. And for Deborah, the silence that followed those words was the loudest condemnation of all. The next few days were a blur of hospital visits, hushed conversations with doctors, and trying to keep Liam's spirits up while Olivia remained on strict bed rest. The ultrasound had revealed some bleeding, and the doctor was concerned about the pregnancy progressing smoothly. The joy we had initially felt was now overshadowed by a constant worry. Olivia was understandably shaken. Not only had her own mother publicly humiliated and physically endangered her, but the stress was now directly impacting our unborn child. She was angry, hurt, and scared. I did my best to be her rock, holding her hand, listening to her fears, and constantly reassuring her that everything would be all right. Deborah, surprisingly, didn't try to contact us directly. Perhaps Liam's words, coupled with the doctor's confirmation of the pregnancy and the news of the complications, had finally pierced through her delusion. Olivia's father, however, was a frequent visitor at the hospital. He was clearly heartbroken by his wife's behavior and offered us his unwavering support. He apologized profusely for Deborah's actions, his voice thick with shame. I don't understand her, Ethan, he confessed one afternoon, sitting beside me in the hospital waiting room while Olivia rested. She's never been this irrational, this cruel. I simply nodded. I didn't have any answers either. Deborah's behavior was beyond comprehension. A few days later, the doctor informed us that Olivia could be discharged, but she would need to remain on bed rest at home and avoid any stress or physical exertion. We were relieved to bring her home, but the atmosphere in our house felt different. The carefree excitement about the baby was replaced by a cautious optimism and a lingering sense of unease. Liam was incredibly sweet and protective of his mother. He'd bring her snacks, read her stories, and try his best to keep her entertained. He also made it clear that he didn't want to see his grandmother. She's not a good person, Dad, he said to me one evening, his brow furrowed with concern. She tried to hurt you and Mom and the baby. I hugged him tightly. You're right, buddy. What she did was wrong. Weeks turned into months. Olivia remained on bed rest, and I took on more responsibilities around the house while working remotely. We had regular checkups, and thankfully, the bleeding stopped and the baby seemed to be doing okay. The initial fear began to subside, replaced by a cautious hope. Deborah remained silent. There were no apologetic phone calls, no remorseful visits. It was as if she had vanished. Olivia's father would occasionally mention her, saying she was laying low and not doing well, but he never elaborated. Then came the day of our baby shower. It was a small, intimate gathering of close friends and family, minus Deborah, of course. Olivia was finally able to get out of bed for a few hours, and the joy in the room was palpable. As we opened gifts and shared stories, there was a sense of celebration and resilience. We had weathered a storm, and now we were looking forward to the calm. During the shower, Olivia's father pulled me aside. Ethan, he said, his voice serious, Deborah wants to talk to you both. I frowned. After everything she's done? I don't know, sir. I know it's difficult, he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. But she's not doing well, I think. I think she finally understands the gravity of what she did. Olivia and I discussed it that evening. Part of me wanted to slam the door in Deborah's face, to never speak to her again. But another part of me, perhaps foolishly, hoped for some semblance of reconciliation, if not for me, then for Olivia and for our child. We agreed to meet her, but on our terms. We chose a neutral location, a quiet coffee shop, and made it clear that Olivia's well-being was our top priority. When Deborah walked into the coffee shop, she looked like a ghost of her former self. Her usual sharp demeanor was gone, replaced by a weariness that seemed to weigh her down. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and her hands trembled slightly as she sat down across from us. She didn't launch into any excuses or denials. Instead, she simply looked at Olivia, her eyes filled with a raw emotion I had never seen before. Olivia, she began, her voice barely a whisper. I am so sorry. The apology felt hollow, too little too late. But as she continued to speak, her words started to carry a weight of genuine remorse. She talked about her own insecurities, her fear of being replaced in Olivia's life, her misguided belief that I wasn't good enough for her daughter. She spoke about the shame she felt for her actions at the pool party and the fear that gripped her when Olivia fainted. When the doctor said there were complications, Deborah's voice broke and tears finally spilled down her cheeks. I was terrified that I had hurt my grandchild, terrified that I had lost my daughter. Olivia and I listened in silence, our expressions unreadable. It was hard to reconcile this broken woman with the cruel, manipulative mother-in-law who had accused us of faking a pregnancy and pushed Olivia into a pool. Liam, what he said, Deborah continued, her gaze dropping to her hands. It hit me harder than anything. A child's honesty. There's no arguing with that. He saw the truth, and the truth is, I was awful. I was jealous, I was bitter, and I let my own insecurities destroy something beautiful. The conversation lasted for over an hour. Deborah didn't ask for forgiveness, but she expressed a deep regret for her actions and the pain she had caused. She acknowledged that she had no right to expect us to forgive her, but she hoped that one day, perhaps, we could find it in our hearts to move forward. As we left the coffee shop that day, Olivia and I were both emotionally drained. It wasn't a magical reconciliation, and the scars of Deborah's actions would likely remain. But there was a sense of something shifting. Perhaps it was the genuine remorse in her voice, or maybe it was the exhaustion of holding on to so much anger. The final twist in our story came a few weeks later. Olivia went into labor a few weeks earlier than expected. It was a difficult and stressful delivery, a stark reminder of the potential consequences of Deborah's reckless act. But finally, after hours of labor, our son, Leo, was born. He was small but healthy, a tiny miracle who had overcome the challenges he faced even before birth. The first time I held Leo in my arms, all the anger and resentment I had felt towards Deborah seemed to fade into the background. All that mattered was this tiny human, our son, our future. Deborah came to the hospital to see Leo. She stood by the crib, her eyes filled with tears as she gazed at her grandson. She didn't try to hold him, didn't say much. She simply looked at him, a silent acknowledgement of the precious life she had almost jeopardized. Olivia and I exchanged a look. There was still a long way to go, a lot of healing to do. But in that moment, seeing Deborah's genuine emotion and holding our son in our arms, it felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a glimmer of hope for the future. The 4 words Liam had spoken in the hospital had indeed shut Deborah up forever, not just silencing her accusation, but forcing her to confront the devastating consequences of her actions. And perhaps, in the quiet aftermath, a fragile path towards healing could begin. If you found this story as wild and unbelievable as we did, make sure to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. We've got more real-life stories, dramatic tales, and relationship rollercoaster rides coming your way that you won't want to miss. Let us know in the comments what you thought of Deborah's actions and Liam's powerful 4 words. Thanks for watching.